Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to the channel. It's Cynicalex. And today I want to talk to you guys about a shift in character building that I've noticed since the X-Men came to the game. And while it originally started with just one character, this effect has now trickled down to multiple characters, and we're starting to see its effects at a wider range or wider scope. And if this trend continues, we may see the sharp decline of certain stats on certain items, and we may see a rise in the prevalence and the value for other certain stats and values. So more specifically, what I'm referring to is that when the X-Men were first introduced, we got a brand new type of skill, a brand new type of effect that we didn't know we could have, and it was what we got on the Phoenix Awakened skill. And this skill is able to pierce or penetrate super armor, barrier, shield, all immune, and invincible. Now, before Jean Grey, we did have characters that could pierce or penetrate certain other types of moves, like they could pierce just super armor or just barrier, things like that. But now here we had a character who could pierce essentially all of them. And that's every single type of defensive maneuver aside from an iframe or a heal. And even in the face of Reflect, it still continues to pierce and deal damage. And Jean Grey was the first to introduce this, but she has not been the one to kind of popularize it. Jean Grey took a few months to catch on, one, because it takes time to build the character, but two, because the meta was still shifting, and the top players and people who were using the character the most were still testing and seeing how this kind of new mechanic would play out. And you might be wondering, well, how does Phoenix Awaken interact with an Obelisk that has invincibility? So for example, Phoenix uses her invincibility, piercing, penetrating skill. She uses Phoenix Awaken. She's fighting my Thanos. My Thanos has a 5-second invincibility Obelisk. Those tornadoes deal damage to Thanos. His invincibility Obelisk procs, they still do damage. The invincibility proc actually has no effect on stopping or halting or even asking for a recheck or anything like that when it comes to those types of penetration skills. And yes, it's only an 80% chance at level 6, but if you've used the skill or if you've seen it used against you, you know that it hits many times. And so that 80% is essentially 100% if you have a skill that hits 20 or 30 times over the course of it being cast. If it only hit once or twice, this wouldn't be so much of an issue. It wouldn't have so much of an impact. But because it hits so many times, now we've got a situation. More recently, we've seen the introduction of 3 more characters who have this native pierce, this native penetration attribute. And the most famous or the most prevalent of them all is definitely Quicksilver. Unstoppable momentum gives him a flat 70% chance to penetrate super armor, barrier, immune, and invincible. He can't pierce shields. That's all he can't pierce. So Loki's shield is safe. Everything else is not safe. Actually, Loki's shield might be a barrier, so maybe even that's not safe. But this is now a step up, a big step up from the Jean Grey situation, because now instead of having an 80% chance on one of the skills, he just has a 70% chance. You could be using his auto attack and you could pierce someone's invincibility Obelisk or someone's all immune. We're not even going to get into the mention of how many times some of Quicksilver's attacks hits, because I'm sure his 5th skill, Days of Thunder, that causes that giant tornado with all those cars, can hit you upwards of 30-40 times per cast. So 70% chance hitting 40 times, you're definitely going to pierce and deal the majority of their health and damage over the course of that one skill. Another character who got this, Quicksilver's sister. She also has this effect where she gets to pierce. She has it on her tier 2 passive, which will be unlocked as soon as you get the character anyways, because she's native tier 2, and she just has a flat 60% chance to pierce super armor, barrier, shield. So she pierces barriers and shields, immune and invincible. It's 10% less, but she gets the extra shield. Again, many hits on a lot of her skills. She even has clones that come in and start to deal additional damage with an auto attack. Those are also going to pierce. She can just flat out remove your effects. in addition to that with Hex. And then of course we also got Cable, probably the one that most people are scrambling to build now. But here on Focus Shot, he's got a 75% chance to penetrate Barrier, Immune, and Invincible. He doesn't penetrate shields, he doesn't penetrate super armor, but everything else he penetrates. And this is a big deal. This is actually an important thing, and it's not as bad as you might think it is. It's going to sound bad at first, but it may actually be better for the longevity of the game. It may be better and healthier for the overall landscape of any kind of competitive fighting we might have, any kind of PvP that you may imagine is in the game. And here's why. With the introduction and with the prevalence and with the use of characters like Jean Grey, Quicksilver, Cable, and Scarlet Witch, we have less of an incentive and there's less of a need to have obelisks with invincibility. So an obelisk like Thanos's, while it is very good for Thanos and 99% of the time in another PvP situation against Doctor Strange or Dormammu or someone else that doesn't pierce, this obelisk or something like it is very, very good. Probably not the ideal stats here, but 5 seconds of invincibility is 5 seconds of invincibility. However, against the new meta, against the Quicksilvers and the Scarlet Witches and the Jean Greys, it does next to nothing. And instead, a lot of players have been opting for just more damage and more reliability in terms of that damage, given the fact that the invincibility obelisk may proc and do nothing for you. And you can see this in high level play, especially when you go to something like Alliance tournaments. Now I know you guys don't like it necessarily because you might just think it's a bunch of whales fighting each other out, but it does reflect that the top players, the players who spend the most time playing this game and they spend the most effort, likely, thinking about and theorizing, have come to the conclusion that putting an invincibility obelisk, slapping a 5-second invincibility obelisk on Jean Grey is not worth the crystals. It is a notorious fact that top level alliances used to change obelisks for competitive play. So they would have an obelisk that had a damage proc like this on Doctor Strange for Extreme Alliance battle, and then when the tournament started and they had to compete in a PvP scenario with Doctor Strange, they would actually pay the 600 crystals, unequip the obelisk, and then they would equip an obelisk with invincibility. That is no longer the case when it comes to characters like Quicksilver and by extension Jean Grey and potentially by extension Scarlet Witch and Cable. And that is because they already deal so much damage that is pierceable that will just ignore the damage reduction and the invincibility proc, that it just doesn't make any sense. You're going to get more value out of just more damage because HP is such a premium stat, and because if you can kill them faster, hey, you can kill them faster. The invincibility isn't going to do anything anyways. And so this is good and bad. It's bad because, well, a lot of people have invested their time and their gold and their resources grinding and farming for good invincibility obelisks, and I'm telling you that they may become obsolete in the future. They will definitely become a lot more obsolete than they already are now if we get in more characters like this in the future, which I can't know that. I'm just speculating we might. And that is bad because it does ruin a lot of the progression and a lot of the investment that people, including myself, have made. There will always be a place for invincibility obelisks because the fights are not always going to be Jean Grey versus Jean Grey, Quicksilver versus Scarlet Witch. These are the heavyweight juggernauts. You're still going to have your average fights against, you know, Elsa versus Kid Kazoo, Ant-Man versus Hulkbuster. These fights will definitely need invincibility obelisks if you want that to be the case, and where penetration and pierce don't matter. But when it comes to the very high level, and when it comes to the most powerful characters duking it out, if the majority of them have this feature, have this penetration, this pierce feature, it's going to grossly devalue the effect and the worth of equipping an obelisk that has invincibility, and that is going to bring some changes of its own. A perfect example would be someone like Thanos. Thanos has extremely high native defenses, both physical and energy. As you can see, I'm rocking about 13,000 on each of his stats there. He's got extremely high native HP, and if you go into his details page, he also has extremely high native resists. And this is partly because he's a Black Order character, the way they've designed him. But look at that, he's got 50% native resistance to all types: fire, cold, lightning, poison, and mind. And these are the kind of stats that are going to actually gain a lot of value if this shift does take place. If Invincibility obelisks can't cover up the shortcomings of a character and can't cover up the weaknesses of a character and the fragility of certain characters, then you're going to have to rely on more constant features like a large HP, very high physical and energy defense, very high resistances, especially if you have characters who deal a specific type of damage, like Jean Grey dealing fire damage, Scarlet Witch dealing mind damage. Other things that are going to come back and swing back into value are things like a very large native heal, because even if you're piercing and penetrating my defenses, if I'm healing it all back up, I can continue fighting you. So someone like Wolverine, maybe even Gwenpool, will have additional value because of that constant heal factor. Reflect is another one that's going to play a big role in this. We don't see a lot of it on the physical Reflect side because Quicksilver has so many iframes, but in the case of Jean Grey, we know that Destroyer is already a factor against her, despite the fact that he doesn't even have an Invincibility obelisk. Most of the time, he just has an extra heal proc from his obelisk. And additionally, iframes and healing will have an additional value if Invincibility obelisks are no longer the best way to protect a character. So I wanted to bring this to your attention because I think it's an interesting development, and I think it speaks to what we could see more of in the future, and where we could see Netmarble trying to kind of wiggle their way out of their design space where they've limited themselves defensively. We don't have a lot of good defensive ways on obelisks to protect our characters, and as long as I can remember, since obelisks were changed from the original kind of skinny ones to the ones that they are now, the different types of boosters, we've seen a massive increase, an exponential growth in the number of Invincibility obelisks used, and it's essentially one of two options for every single character in the game, whether it's a damage proc for higher score or an Invincibility proc for basically everything else. But now we're seeing a shift. Now we're seeing some value being taken back and taken away from Invincibility obelisks. What do you guys think is going to happen? Do you think they're going to do the same thing for damage procs, or do you think this is just an anomaly and we're not going to get any more of these types of characters? Do you want more of these types of characters, or do you think that this is a game-breaking mechanic? Hit me up in the comments. Subscribe if you're having a good time, and of course, if you like what you see, I hope to see you again tomorrow. Take care.